Was Jesus a white person? No. Did he also look like this junk science? Probably not. This is a pet peeve of mine. In 2001, BBC hired a forensic artist to reconstruct what an average first-century Jew might look like, using one of 3 skulls excavated from ancient Palestine, for a special they were doing on the life of Jesus. And like some sensationalist game of telephone, this facial reconstruction turns from what a first-century Jew may look like into the real face of Jesus, according to science.
There is a lot of bullshit currently masquerading as science. So if they are going to keep saying a study says, they should have to provide sourcing and context or not mention it at all. And I know what you're thinking, well, hold on, if that happens, where am I going to get all my interesting bullshit from?
And while it's technically correct to say that this is the most accurate reconstruction of Jesus' face according to scientific methods, sorry 3D reconstruction of the Shroud of Turin, this is a sensationalist headline that is misleading. One could equally claim that this is the most accurate representation of any first-century Jew, including John the Baptist, the Apostle Paul, and even every other disciple. Secondly, facial reconstruction can only reconstruct the general shape of the face. Soft tissue details such as skin, hair, eyes, nose, lips, and ears are at best an educated guess. And these are things we generally think of when we think of someone's face. And they did do some things right. He probably would have been darker skinned with Semitic features, he would have been more physically fit from working a labor job, as well as his skin may have been damaged by the sun. As for the hair stuff, that's still contentious. Mark Goodacre uses pictures found within a 3rd century Jewish synagogue to support his notion that Jews in the 1st century would have had short hair. The problem being, this synagogue is from over a century after the conclusion of the Jewish-Roman Wars, an event that drastically altered the already complicated nature of the Romanization of the Jewish culture. A lot of people like to cite the fact that Paul says it's disgraceful for a man to have long hair, but they also seem to neglect the fact that what Paul meant by long hair and what we mean by long hair are completely different things. When Paul talks about long hair, he specifically contrasts it is wrong for a man to have long hair as a woman has long hair, and in that culture women had long hair to their waist. It also completely omits the possibility that Jesus could have taken a Nazirite vow, which really isn't that crazy when you consider his relation to John the Baptist, but is a little skeptical when you consider his relationship to wine. It's really not something that's unheard of for a devout Jew to do at the time, and even Paul seems to have taken a Nazirite vow when he went to Cancre in the book of Acts. Also, I'm just gonna say, why couldn't Jesus have changed his hairstyle and beard style throughout his life? Basically, we know very little about what Jesus looked like. He was probably of average appearance. The fact that Jesus has to be kissed by Judas as an indicator to the Roman soldiers as to which one is Jesus seems to imply that they couldn't just pick him out from a crowd. Like if he was the giant 6'2" guy, or if he was the random guy of a completely different race. Or it meant the exact opposite, that he was just super beautiful and Judas wanted an excuse to kiss him.
Where was I?
Jesus has a swimmer's body.
Jesus has a swimmer's body. And while he's one of the more spiritual people on earth, he's also very attractive to you.
He's attractive to me?
Jesus is sexy to you, which leads us on to the musical interlude, Rock Me Sexy Jesus.
As for what Jesus looked like historically, this varies greatly depending on your early source. The Gospels don't seem to portray it, none of the disciples or early writings seem to relay what Jesus looks like, and the first pictures we get of him seem to be extremely dependent on the culture they're coming from. In fact, the oldest picture we have of Jesus is the Alexamenos graffiti, in which he has a donkey's head, and an inscription that reads Alexamenos worships his god. Basically, for some weird reason, Romans thought Jews worshipped a donkey, so it's a way of making fun of Alexamenos for being both a Jew and a Christian. But usually, each culture tends to portray Jesus in their own culture's fashion. Early Romans portray him wearing Roman clothes, with short hair, no beard, and sometimes using a magic wand. These things represent to Romans that he's well-bred, he's intelligent, and that he has magical powers. But many in the early church, still having strong ties to Judaism, had aniconic reservations about portraying Jesus, fearing it could slip into idolatry. Proponents of icons would say that they're not actually worshipping the icon, but rather choosing to venerate the physical human form that God chose to take. French art historian Paul Vignon noted 15 marks that were common in Christian iconography, including 2 strands of hair on his forehead, a gap between his beard and lower lip, a forked beard, and a raised right eyebrow. Vignon believed that these traits were drawn from sources believed to be miraculous, like the icon of Edessa, the Veil of Veronica, or some have even theorized the Shroud of Turin. In general, Vignon isn't really taken seriously. As for literary sources, depictions of Jesus seem to be highly dependent on the theological claims that the source is trying to make. In the book of Isaiah, it says that the suffering servant wouldn't be especially beautiful and people wouldn't be attracted to him for that reason. And early Christians like Tertullian and Justin Martyr, in believing that Jesus was the fulfillment of the suffering servant, also claimed he wasn't beautiful either. The Slavic version of Josephus' writings described Jesus as being dark-skinned, 4'6", hunchbacked, with a long nose, unibrow, thinning hair, and beard. Other ones that claimed he was ugly, like Celsus, seems to be just trying to tear down Christianity in every way imaginable. He claims that Jesus was ugly, short, that his mother was a whore. And later you get guys like Augustine and Jerome who believe that Jesus is the embodiment of perfection in all ways, including physical beauty. Gnostics seem to imply Jesus can shapeshift.
Like a shapeshifter or a changeling.
This Gnostic text, the Acts of John, has this ridiculous story where Jesus shows up to 2 people at the same time. And one of them sees him as an old man who's balding and has a huge beard, and the other person sees him as a young man with almost no beard. This is also how Gnostics understand the 2 guys traveling with Jesus not recognizing him on the road to Emmaus, where 2 guys are walking down the road and they're talking about Jesus, and then all of a sudden they realize, oh, you're Jesus. He shapeshifted, and then all of a sudden, like, revealed himself or something.
Dirty old bum. And he comes up to me, I'm about to sock him one because he's a dirty old bum. And then I said, wait a minute, I better not sock this guy, something special about him.
Yeah. And it turns out it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Early Islamic sources also vary in how they describe Jesus. Sometimes he has light skin and red hair, resembling the Europeans that worship him. And other times he's described in more Middle Eastern fashion, having the ideal color of brown skin. Something that reinforces his role as a prophet within Islam. And this brings me back to what's actually important here. Each group wants to portray Jesus in their own image. For Christians, it's God becoming one of us that brings about salvation. As Gregory of Nazianzus said, that which he is not assumed he cannot save. So why wouldn't we make him resemble us when we're trying to emphasize that he was one of us? Whether he be black, or Korean, or a terrifying ginger.
Hey, Korean Jesus. I don't know if you only cater to Korean Christians, or if you even exist. No offense. Korean Jesus, I just really don't want to this up. Sorry for swearing so much.
Hey! Stop with Korean Jesus. He ain't got time for your problems. He busy with Korean shit.
The only problem comes is when we export our idea of Christ onto other cultures. And I think that's what a lot of the reaction to Eurocentric Jesus is. But outside the influence of some forged documents, nobody actually believed that the traditional portrayal of Jesus was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed European man.
Fair-skinned, flaxen-haired image of Jesus.
Fine, Discovery Channel, but they know they suck anyway. As for a drink, I'd say, let the bartender choose. Each person should be allowed to have their own favorite Jesus, just like each person should be allowed their own favorite drink.